Thanks for joining us. We are talking to Sacha Gera. He's Senior Vice President, Cloud Products at Ribbon Communications. Sacha, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Sacha, for our audience members who may not know so much about Kandy and Ribbon, what can you tell us about your offer and how you help service providers?
Absolutely. So Ribbon Communications was formed about 18 months ago. It was an amalgamation of Genband and Sonos Communications, two titans in the real-time communication space. We're a global leader in real-time communications with a strong heritage and DNA in communication service providers and enterprise-type solutions. Kandy is kind of taking that DNA from the carrier side and enabling carriers, large enterprises, and independent software vendors to embrace the cloud with real-time communication solutions from the cloud, both CPaaS, UCaaS type solutions, as well as contact center solutions. So we're all about rapid service creation and white label platform as a service applications.
Sacha, you talked to us at TelecomTV last year. What's changed over the past 12 months?
There's so much going on here, and it's always a pleasure to be back here at Mobile World Congress. Last year I talked a little bit about telecoms becoming more like utility companies and having to move up the value chain. And I think this year, 5G is obviously starting to take off, and typical telco speak, bigger, faster, cheaper, bigger pipes, and we see that starting to matriculate. But one thing that's subtly changed this year and generally in the industry is the idea of telecoms really moving up the value chain and starting to offer actual use cases and services, more value-based pricing as opposed to just data consumption and minutes arbitrage. And that's really where Kandy comes in as well, because we're all about carriers moving up the value chain, offering new applications that cater to market verticals and really masking the complexity of the telecom network in new and innovative ways. One of the announcements that really caught my attention here over the last week, there was a vendor in Japan that launched a private mobile virtual network operator out of Japan on a private cloud instance for unbelievably, in a record amount of time, less than 7 months, very cheap. And this to me is a really progressive sign of carriers not only embracing the cloud, but doing things on the cheap, saving their CapEx dollars so they can invest more into use cases and monetizing the business in new ways. So I think that's really encouraging this year.
Sacha, can you share some examples of how service providers are leveraging cloud-based solutions like Kandy to remain competitive?
Yeah, well, building off that example of the Japanese carrier that launched, the mobile network operator. Similarly, we've had some really interesting announcements this year. So we had Optus out in Australia that publicly announced Optus Loop Live. And this is an example similar in a similar context where a carrier wanted to go to market faster. They basically asked us to help them get to market in a record amount of time, where it was a shared risk model, very similar to the other announcement. And we basically ended up spinning up a whole new mobile-first UCaaS solution off of a public cloud infrastructure in partnership with Optus in a very small amount of time. And so that's a perfect example of how carriers are starting to embrace the cloud and leverage the cloud in new and interesting ways.
So how can service providers better compete with the likes of Twilios, of Facebook and others in order to maintain and grow their customer base?
Well, I think step one is you got to save your precious CapEx dollars, enter it into shared risk kind of arrangements with vendors like us who are more innovative, can get to market quickly, and really try to leverage and monetize the use case aspect of this, move up the value chain. And Kandy is all about unlocking the intellectual assets or the IPR of the telecom network. The telecoms bring existing billing relationships, the last mile, the frequency, the spectrum, but what's difficult to do for large enterprise is to really unlock that potential with easy to use APIs or Lego pieces where you don't have to know anything about the telecom network or the deep protocol expertise. And so Kandy in our CPaaS solution, it's very much about masking the complexity of the telecommunications network, opening it up to developers and IT organizations who can use simple to use APIs, inserting real-time communications, the telecom assets into the business process, creating new applications on mobile, on desktop, and monetizing new use cases. And it's all about moving up the value chain. So that's a big part of our story here.
Well, we very much look forward to talking to you again next year. What do you think we'll discuss then?
Yeah, well, this year I found the topics here were very similar. The 5G, the AI, those types of topics. I think next year is really going to be a big shift, and we've seen it subtly here on, you go to the Ericsson booth, you hear a little bit more about the use cases. I think next year, the investments in 5G are kind of here. How do we monetize this mammoth investment we've made? How do we create more use cases by hiding the complexity of the telecom network with CPaaS type applications or mobile UCaaS type applications? So I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis next year on the actual use cases. And lastly, I'd say, it's been a little bit under the radar. We have this Gartner hype cycle, but WebRTC is finally here. It took 7 years to standardize. All the major browsers, including Google and Microsoft and Firefox and Chrome and Safari, have all kind of adopted this as a next generation telephony stack. And it's going to open up embedded communications, contextual communications as a standard to create more of these use cases. And I think next year, that's going to be a big theme here because people are starting to really realize it's taken a while, but we're finally there. So I think WebRTC and embedded communications will be a bigger role next year.
Sacha, Gera, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.